Um, I had taught for a couple of years at a little completely bonkers independent school where I taught Latin, English, history, RE and fencing. And after that I thought, I must go somewhere perhaps in London. I wasn't quite sure where to go. But Wimbledon College popped up because I'd been educated by the Jesuits myself, you see. And I tottled along there, and the headmaster was a bloke called Robert Carty, SJ, very small, very rotund, just died unfortunately, the oldest Jesuit of the order, and a great one for picking his teeth with a pin, which he took out of his lapel, and he poked them in between his teeth like this. And he said, as I walked into the room, I know you because I was a boy in Glasgow with your current headmaster. He said, how are you with women? And I said, I get on pretty well with women, I think. Good, good, he said, because we're about to do a joint production of Oliver with the Ursuline Convent, our sister school, and we need somebody to go along and co-direct it with the women there. And I said, oh, well, I'm happy to do that. Good, he said. Oh, and you've got the job, by the way. Well, I had one more when his successor, Father Hackett, said to me, oh, Potter, Doyle's leaving as head of English. Do you want to take over? And I said, oh, okay, Father. So that sorted me out for 45 years, you know. And that's the only thing. No PowerPoint presentation, no lesson being observed, no targets or anything like that. Carty then, who was delightful, introduced me to Harry Doyle, who was the head of English at the college. You know, very gnome-like, you know, always had a fag in his mouth like that Yorkshire, you know, dead now, unfortunately. And he said, oh, aye, he said, what do you think about this new bugger? And I said, what bugger, Mr. Doyle? And he said, CSE. Now, that was a Certificate of Secondary Education for not very bright pupils, you know. And I'd never heard of it. And I said something like, you know, I think it's a very valuable educational initiative which will probably provide a wide range of... And before I could finish, he said, right, you're in charge of the bugger. And so I found myself in charge of CSE and producing a play, neither of which I'd done before, in the first year, which was rather a hoot. I met the head of music, a chap called John Wilson, very energetic, another Scotsman actually, and he said, you know, he wanted to produce Joseph's Dreamcoat, even before Oliver, so I agreed to do that with him. And I suddenly found myself on this sort of treadmill, which has led to 65 school plays, you know, without really knowing what I'm doing. I still don't obviously really know what I'm doing, I'm just winging it really. Harry Doyle used often to come down to the room. I thought originally he was inspecting my teaching, but actually he wasn't. He was coming down to bum a cigarette, because he was a terrific smoker, and I was in those days. He used to tap at the door, tap, tap, I'd open it, and he'd say, aye, come out into the corridor for a moment. And I'd say, oh, yes, Harry. He'd say, you leave those buggers. Carry on reading Macbeth, Act 2, Scene 3. Give him a cigarette, and he'd say, aye. And we'd have a smoke, and he always complained about whoever was the headmaster. When Peter Hackett, SJ, I think still alive, took over from Carty, he used to stand in the corridor saying, aye, I don't like that bugger Hackett. And I said, oh no, Hackett's all right, he's a nice chap. I know, he's got his eye on me, you know. Got another fag. So I'd give him a fag. And you know, he often used to just come into the classroom when I was teaching and just pat my pockets. Take the packet out and put two in his top pocket, one in his mouth. One day, Hackett came up to me in the playground and said, Potter? I said, yes, Father. He said, is Doyle pissed? Because Harry used to go out to have at least 6 pints every lunchtime. I said, I don't think so, Father, of course not. I think he's tired at the moment because of the really quite difficult moderation that we're undertaking for the CSE. Trying to save Harry. And Harry then came up to Hackett and he said, aye, Father, what you bloody need is a bloody good pear. And he took a pear out of his pocket, which was half rotting, and went and shoved it in Hackett's hand, and all the juice and pips came out there. And he wended his way off, and Hackett gave me a look as if to say, you know, Doyle is pissed, isn't he? And the following term, Harry left eventually, and I simply took over his department. I had no interview, nothing really. I discovered teaching was incredibly easy. You go into the room and you say, morning chaps, and you know, you sort of read a jolly old book. This is of course English, I'm obviously terrible doing maths. And they ask a question about, say, haunted houses, and you have a quick thing about ghosts, you know, and then suddenly the bell goes. I never really had lesson plans. What I used to write was something like, you know, Animal Farm Continued or something. And I remember once with Jonathan Lomas, my dear colleague, peeking over my shoulder at my lesson plan for Macbeth, and I'd written Macbeth Cont. And he said, "Oh, I don't know that I agree, Simon." He said, "I mean, I think Macbeth had his bad points, but I think Lady Macbeth was far worse, because after all, Macbeth had a conscience." I said, "No, Cont, Macbeth Cont, continued." And I did attempt it once or twice when inspectors came, but I was dead lucky, because I was only ever inspected twice in my entire teaching career. Once by a bloke from the borough who came in. He was slightly northern, rather dreary, you know, and he said, "Mr. Potter, I've come to see your syntax 1D. Now that, after all, is bottom set GCSE guys, smallish class, about 17, and none of them at all academic. And he said, "Have you got your lesson plan?" "Oh, yes." And I gave him something that I had written, so I knew he was coming. And he said, "Oh, I see you're doing Wordsworth, The Prelude, The Stolen Boat, a very good poem." He said, "I'll just sit round the corner, they won't notice me." Anyway, he sat right at the back of the room, sort of tucked in, and the boys rushed in, you see, and they said, "Sir, sir." I said, "Oh, hello chaps, everybody, do sit down. Sir, can you just finish telling us that story that you were telling us about how when you dig up a dead body and you know, you try to revivify it?" And I said, "Would you mind," I said to the inspector, "if I just finish a tale about this story about premature burial?" "Oh, well, all right," he said. And I said, "This is an inspector gentleman at the back." The chap settled down, and I said, "Well, anyway, look, what happens is this." And I told him about how, you know, what you do with a dead body and all that. And then it led into this thing about a demon who possessed a woman living up near the Scottish border, and how it clung to the back of her Fiat 500 and its huge claws ripped the paint of the car. And that sort of slightly led me on to Aleister Crowley, the wickedest man in the world, and how he raised a demon in the Negev desert, and the demon tore the left breast of his assistant, Victor Neuberg, a German. And that led me on to tell them a story about a Jesuit I knew who'd done an exorcism of a demon, and suddenly the bell went. The class and I'd hardly noticed, you know. Anyway, the inspector got up and he shut his file with a little snap, and he said, "Are all your lessons like that?"